Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about Title IX and its impact on women's sports.
First, we'll talk about the history of Title IX, the impacts of Title IX, goals and challenges with Title IX, and then key players and advocates.
First, we'll go over the history. What is Title IX? It was created to prevent the discrimination based on sex in educational institutions. The following words ultimately are what led to where women's sports are today. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. But this was only the beginning. For context, women face discrimination in many ways in education and sports. Some schools would refuse or make it harder for women to be enrolled there, having limits on how many women were allowed. Women's sports were not given as much funding compared to men's, had way more rules and regulations, and were never prioritized in any way. People often argued that women didn't show interest in the level of competition that men did. Initially, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination based on race, religion, national origin, but none regarding sex. For example, Title VII prohibited discrimination in employment, and Title IV prohibited racial discrimination in federally funded institutions. Neither specifically prohibited discrimination based on sex. Because women face a lot of discrimination in education as well as sports, there was not a lot of participation. Edith Green helped pass the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which helped shape the conversation around gender equity. In 1972, Title IX was written by Representative Patsy T. Mink, who was the first woman of color to be elected to Congress, and then Title IX was then brought into the Senate by Birch Bay as an inclusion of the Education Amendments of 1972. President Richard Nixon then signed the Education Amendments into law, including Title IX. There was a great increase in women's participation in sports in school due to Title IX. There was a lot of pushback from institutions, though, including the NCAA, who stated that equal funding for men's and women's sports would negatively impact male sports. Title IX called for a male, female, and intersex team, or no team at all for the sports. The NCAA then wrote to President Richard Nixon to reconsider, saying it would be disruptive and counterproductive. Colleges, including Boston College, made similar complaints, saying women wouldn't want to compete at as high of levels as men do. Even though women's teams were made, common issues included inconvenient practice locations and times, transportation via vans, no food allowances for away trips, disproportionate scholarship money between men and women, and many women's teams were refused varsity status. On December 11, 1979, the Department of Education released an interpretation of Title IX, creating the three-part test that would be used on institutions when being checked for compliance. The first part being the number of male and female athletes is substantially proportionate to their respective enrollments, or the institution has a history in continuing practice of expanding participation opportunities responsive to the developing interests and abilities of the underrepresented sex, or 3, the institution is fully and effectively accommodating interests and abilities of the underrepresented sex. In 1984, the Grove City College v. Bell, the Supreme Court ruled that institutions only need to guarantee women's equal rights / Title IX in programs that directly receive federal funding, which some programs don't necessarily get funded directly, so this ruling gave a loophole for schools to not have to give equal rights to women. On March 22, 1988, the Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1987 undoes Grove City v. Bell over Ronald Reagan's veto, allowing students to also get money for damages from sex-related discrimination. July 23, 1998, a Dear Colleague letter came out to reiterate that scholarship money must be proportional to percentage of the gender represented at the school. There were many more similar letters being sent out through the years to make sure schools were informed and complied. In 2005, the Department of Education issued an interpretation on the three-part test, which allowed schools to use email as a valid way to gauge female interest in sport and use it to determine whether or not to have that sport that year, which weakened Title IX. Throughout the years, lots of interpretations were being made and sent out. In May 2016, the Department of Education and Department of Justice sent out a guidance letter to make it so that people can't be discriminated against based on gender identity and can't exclude them from sports because of that. This gets taken back by the Office for Civil Rights in 2017. Then in August 2020, Betsy DeVos wrote a new section in Title IX narrowing down the definition of sexual assault and misconduct, as well as providing more regulations on how schools go about handling accusations, in which critics say protected the perpetrators more than the victims. In January 2021, Joe Biden made Executive Order 13988 to combat discrimination on gender identity and sexual orientation. In March of 2021, Joe Biden made Executive Order 14021, which guaranteed a discrimination-free educational environment based on sex. On June 16, 2021, the Biden administration included transgender people under the protections of Title IX. And then finally, in 2024, the Biden administration announced new rules in Title IX to undo Betsy DeVos's doings in regards to sexual misconduct in institutions, requiring any accusations to be treated equally and fairly, and instilling protections back to the victims. Since 1972, women's participation in sport has increased by 990%. There are more professional opportunities for women, and women are perceived differently and can be just as competitive or even more competitive than men.
The impacts of Title IX. Number 1. Increased participation in sports. Before its implementation, women had limited access to athletic programs. Title IX requires that educational institutions provide equal opportunities for both genders in sports, leading to more girls and women participating in athletics, as well as greater availability of scholarships and resources for female athletes. Number 2. Equal access. Title IX has played an essential role in ensuring that women have equal access to educational programs and courses. This has had a significant impact in fields traditionally dominated by men, such as science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, where women have gained greater opportunities for advancement in education. Number 3. Workplace equity. Title IX also applies to faculty and staff, requiring that educational institutions provide equal treatment in hiring, promotion, and pay regardless of sex. This has led to an increased opportunity for women in academic and administrative roles, and has worked to address disparities in educational employment. The goals and challenges of Title IX. Number 1. Challenges and criticisms. Critics argue that it has led to the reduction of men's athletic programs as schools work to comply with gender equity requirements. Others debate that the interpretation of Title IX in cases of sexual assault, particularly regarding how schools handle accusations and the balance between the rights of survivors and the accused. Number 2. Goals and accomplishments. Title IX aims to provide women and girls with the same opportunities as their male counterparts in education, athletic programs, and employment within educational institutions. It seeks to ensure that all students, regardless of gender, have equal access to educational opportunities, including academics, sports, and extracurricular activities. Title IX has achieved gender equality in education by ensuring that both male and female students have equal access to academics, athletics, and extracurricular opportunities.
Here are some key advocates for Title IX. Patsy Mink. Representative Patsy Mink from Hawaii is known for being a major author and sponsor of Title IX. She was a pioneer and dedicated leader in reforming education while sharing her experiences. She was the first woman of color elected in the House of Representatives. Edith Green. Representative Edith Green from Oregon was known as a big contributor to the making of Title IX. She was committed to making education better. She mostly focused her work on social reform and women's issues. Dr. Bernice R. Sandler. Dr. Bernice R. Sandler is known as the godmother of Title IX, as she had a significant contributions to the creation and implementation of Title IX law. She was an advocate for women's rights. Senator Birch Bayh. Senator Birch Bayh has been called the father of Title IX because of his work on drafting the legislation and making sure it got through the Senate. He was one of the 3 contributors to Title IX.